And now we turn our attention to panel 2, which is going to discuss using emotional intelligence in SMEs and family businesses. Our moderator is Lopez Collymore, and our panelists are Dr. Vishnu Doerga from Guyana, Sanyu Richards in the BVI, and Christian Haloute here in Trinidad and Tobago. I will begin by introducing Faye and then hand over to her to introduce her panelists more and handle today's panel discussion. Faye Lopez Collymore is an attorney at law whose career began focused on providing in-house legal services across a wide range of commercial activities, particularly property development, insurance, and finance services. She retired from Guardian Holdings Limited in 2019. She has been a director and is a director at Unitrust Corporation. She's been a past director of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, as well as a part-time lecturer and consultant in corporate governance and corporate secretarial practices. Faye has been a director here at the CCGI for several years, recently retired off the board, and conducts a lot of our workshops on corporate secretaries. You can learn a lot more about Faye in the bio, which was provided in the agenda to you. But Faye, I would like to warmly welcome you now and hand over panel 2 to you as you look at emotional intelligence in family-owned businesses and SMEs.
Thank you, Kamala. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this wonderful occasion of Governance Week, and in particular for asking me to moderate this panel, which I think is probably one of those discussion topics that can potentially keep people awake at 3 o'clock on a balmy afternoon. Some of us are suffering from rain, some of us from sun. So I will very glad to be here, and I would like to quickly introduce our 3 panelists. As I think we have had the practice throughout of Governance Week, the full details of the bios of our panelists are contained in the agenda document, and I will just say a few words by way of introduction. I will introduce all the panelists, and then I will ask them each to give us a short verbal presentation on the topic of emotional intelligence as it relates to SMEs and family businesses. Our first panelist will be Dr. Vishnu Doerga. He hails from Guyana. He is deeply passionate about personal, professional, and organizational growth, which seem to be qualities perfectly suited to our topic for this panel. He also has a strong background in management, specializing in entrepreneurship, which again is very relevant when discussing anything relating to SMEs. Our second panelist is Sanyu Richards, who hails from the BVI, I believe. She's an attorney at law, general counsel with the firm of Simonet Lewis LP, and practices in the areas of regulatory, corporate, trust and probate law and estate planning, with a focus on a private client portfolio. Quite an illustrious legal career, and no doubt can provide some insights into this topic, as I'm sure there must be more than a few SMEs in a private client portfolio where you can learn a lot about emotional intelligence. Christian Haloute is our third panelist, and he is described as a second-generation participant in the family business whose experience with the business has been a lifelong one. It is in this lifelong informal career that he suggests the interpersonal skills and resilient motivation to thrive and develop within the family and family business has been nurtured. What more can one add as to why he is participating in this panel? We have a few different backgrounds, which I hope will present for us a very rich discussion on this topic. And I'll start by inviting Dr. Doerga to give us a few words on the topic.
Thank you very much, Faye, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And you did mention that this could be a topic that can keep us awake in the afternoon at 3 p.m., but it's also a topic that keeps many business owners awake at 3 a.m. on most mornings when they're very worried about the team that they have in place, how their organization is going to move to the next level, if they can depend on their family members even sticking around, and the incentives that they need to put in place to keep people around, to keep the business going, to have it moving from generation to generation if they choose to do so. Or if they intend to sell the business, how can they ensure that they're actually selling a business and not just a job that they've created? So with all that said, it's always good to start with the quick definition. And again, emotional intelligence, is really the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and influence one's own emotion, but also the emotions of others. And some key components, of course, are self-awareness. You must be able to recognize what's happening internally, how it affects your thoughts and your behaviors. And then to move towards self-regulation. Once you know what's going on, once you cannot easily succumb anymore to the triggers that make people push your buttons in one way or another, you can now start regulating yourself to say, okay, if this particular activity happens, instead of it affecting my emotions this way, let me think it through and let me choose my course of action that will be healthy for myself, but also for others. I think what's also very key with emotional intelligence is motivation, which is being clear on what you're driven by and be clear on separating what the intrinsic parts are, what is really your own purpose, but also the extrinsic rewards. None of us is either completely one or the other. So that awareness of what really drives us is important. When we think about that self side of it, we also need to think about the others. And the easiest way to sum that up is empathy, which is really the ability to understand and share the feelings of others and fostering that compassion or connection. People are not likely to get onto our team and to be very supportive if they don't feel understood. And again, that's why it's so important to understand yourself, because understanding others without understanding yourself can quickly turn into a doormat situation where we're very willing to do everything for everyone else, but we keep pushing our own needs on the back burner, and that will over time just be a ticking time bomb. And with those skills, of course, making sure that we have the social skills to really manage relationships, develop our leadership, and where people really start seeing us as an effective communicator that easily minimizes and manages conflict. Conflict will always be there. Conflict is one of the reasons in family-owned businesses that people exit the business, completely go in a completely different direction because they could not deal with a conflict, especially if they ended up with an initial founder that was very aggressive or even assertive. So getting to a place where we minimize that conflict, and if and when it does happen, because it will, that we're very skillful at making sure that people don't feel as if they're in harm's way, that we can bring the best that they have to the table so that the entire enterprise can continue to really benefit from that uniqueness that it brings to the market. So Faye, with that, I just wanted to kind of give you my thoughts on the framework of emotional intelligence and also why it's so important, so that we're able to actually get some sleep in the morning and wake up all well and refreshed for the day.
Yes, no, like setting that framework is really important. Sometimes we have different ideas as to what emotional intelligence actually means. And I think when you set out that framework, which very clearly demonstrates how all the parts fit together, that it helps us understand that the basis of it is really not so much the social interaction. You have to start with the self and understanding yourself before you can get to those other parts. So let me then move on to Sanyu for her comments. Sanyu, yes?
Sanyu, you're
yes. Mute.
Good afternoon again, everybody. I'm sorry about that. Yes. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Kamla. Thank you for having me again with a challenging presentation, a challenging discussion to delve into. And Vishnu, thank you so much for that introduction and for the definition, for giving us a common place from which to start in understanding what we're talking about. So I'm going to come to this from the perspective of a practicing attorney with clients who, as Faye mentioned to start with, probably would, and in fact do include some family businesses with which I engage in the capacity either of director or as a professional legal advisor. Some of them have substantial assets, some a little, basically a little bit more than mom and pop, but not big deals. So not a huge quantity, but certainly a variety in terms of my experience of mainly family businesses, not so much the SMEs that are not family businesses. And in terms of emotional intelligence, first thing that when I saw the topic, I thought, well, I think like most professionals, and maybe lawyers more so than anybody else, and especially when you've been in practice a long time, I certainly, my default setting is that, of course, I come to any encounter with a client from a place of professional neutrality, professional objectivity. And I have not thought very hard about, well, what's my baggage? What do I bring? And the whole idea of emotional intelligence, there was requiring that interrogation, that self-awareness of what I'm bringing. I think that there's a saying, we see as we are, and not as things necessarily are. And I think that runs through, in thinking about this presentation, I thought here, I think that probably runs through, and it does behove us all as professionals to own, to face up, to interrogate and own our own perspectives, because we do walk in with perspectives. You do walk into a room sometimes, and what I was thinking about, what I recognize as a point at which I am emotionally engaged in a way that I shouldn't be with a client, or that might be prejudicial, is irritation. Like once I'm in a conversation with a client and I start to feel irritated, I realize that's usually a red flag, and I need to find a way to manage that emotion. I need to be that self-aware and think, and then of course it's not just self-knowledge, it is also self-awareness of the client, of what the client situation is. And why is it particularly important, or is it more important in family businesses than in other kinds of enterprises, in other kind of businesses? I'd say on a balance, probably because of the structure of the very structure of a family business, because unlike a business that people approach at arm's length, with family businesses, the primary connection is a familial one, it's an emotional one, it's a personal one. And therefore the professional or business objectivity that is going to be assumed in a more arm's length business relationship, is going to be compromised. And when I say compromised, I don't think that's necessarily, I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. That emotion, that familiarity can bring some very positive stuff. You're all coming from the same place, hopefully. You've all got similar values, and you bring this into the room with you. On the other hand, you might also bring a lot of emotional baggage with you that comes from that familiarity, all the angst, all the, I don't know, the unfairnesses that perhaps you felt somebody meted out on you as a child, and you're sitting at the boardroom table, and that child has never really gone away. So those things all factor into it, and we need to recognize it. So the dynamic of the family business, I think, is perhaps more than any other kind of business, one in which the emotions do come in, perhaps more evidently and more predictably than they might in other circumstances. So how in advising, then, in working in those kinds of situations, how does emotional intelligence play in? First, the whole awareness, the whole idea of awareness, my self-awareness as well as awareness of the persons with whom you engage in this context. Every family has a dynamic. I guess every business has a dynamic, of course, but every family has a dynamic. So it's important for me to be able to observe and understand that, see the ways in which it's functional, see the ways in which it's not functional in terms of it helping the enterprise. And again, in thinking about this and discussing it with a couple of other colleagues, actually, professional advisors with whom I work quite closely, the thing that we all came to was that it's one of the ways in which you can actually acquire enough knowledge, enough awareness about what makes this group tick, is not just sitting with them together as a group, which is important, of course, the time is spent together, but also trying to spend some one-on-one time. If you can find a way to spend some one-on-one time with the people who comprise whatever the governance body of that particular family is, that will help you understand the dynamic of the group better, because it obviously feeds in. You might find that the quietest person in the room is perhaps the most influential. You might actually learn that the most influential person to this group, to this family, is not in the room, never actually sits in the boardroom. You might find out that that person who somehow is never able to align with the views of the rest of the board, or find some way, who's always kind of the one that you've got to cajole and to try and get around to see. That there might be a history there that you're never going to find out from sitting together in a room, but that you might find out or get to some sort of inkling of in one-on-one encounters. So getting to a place where you know enough about these people to be able to better advise, better craft ways in which to work with them, structures which might work for them, that will come better from both group engagement and individual engagement with the people involved. And I think that investment in time as well will probably pay off, because there's growing trust that is built between yourself and both the family, but also the individuals that you have maybe put aside time to get to engage with in your relationship as an advisor. Yesterday's conversation, and I'm segueing onto now another aspect, I think, and related, but in this, is in advising cross-generational boards, which typically your small family business will be. So I can't remember who it was yesterday in one of the sessions, but there was quite a little discussion about the fact that you might find in the same room generations that cut from baby boomers, such as myself, to Gen Zs, and that's a huge span of generations when you think about it. That really is quite a gap. And so how does emotional intelligence maybe help us in working with this? There is diversity, there is, everybody has something to bring, and we recognize that. However, you also recognize that there's also a lot of push and pull. You know, you will find that people are coming from different places. That generation that has never been without a device in its hand, you know, from the time it was 5 until now. That generation that has gone to school, to professional schooling at least, where things like compliance and AML and ESG and all these things are part of the curriculum, as compared to those of us who've come to it much later, and those in the boardroom that have come to it much later. What we tend to find is that, for example, older family members, I forgot to time myself. Faye.
I think you're fine. I'll just give you
Okay.
a minute or so more. We'll have plenty of time to talk afterwards as well, if you can't get in all the points.
Right, so I'll just conclude on this little bit, because I think I did not budget the time. So yes, so that generation that came in before compliance was a thing, that you get some real pushback when it comes to saying, well, we need more and we need more and we need more, because the regulator requires more, because we must make sure that our due diligence is to this standard. Yes, we know that, 2 years ago you supplied this, but now we need that as well. And yes, we know that you might have another, maybe your insurance company has asked you for the same thing, but we will need that as well. No, the government will not go and get it from the insurance company. We must have it as well. So, and there's a lot of pushback there. And again, in terms of advising, say, estate planning and talking to older people about the fact that, should we be looking at revising this will? What about your digital assets? What about, we need to make some provision here. And they are completely, well, why would this matter? What digital assets? All I have is I have my WhatsApp and my Facebook. Why would I need to make any provision in my will for this? And so explaining, being able to know your family well enough, know the client well enough to think, well, if I can get the younger people in this family to perhaps talk to the older people, not at the board table necessarily, but in conversation, and explain, bring into the conversation how the context has changed. Regulatory context has changed. Obviously, the digital world out there has gone from, us who started out as totally analog to where they are. And we need to sort of like move into this as well. That sort of, you being able to use that to influence then how the older people are thinking, and how you might then the next time you sit in a room and start the conversation, they might have been brought a little more along because, I don't know, a favorite grandson had a word or just managed to mention in conversation something that pointed them to the right direction. So those ways in which you can better manage. And I say just certainly in closing for now that I don't think we should, I think what's really important as well is we talked about purpose in the last session, is the tools. What tools do you use? Can you use, does emotional intelligence help you to better get to and feed into? And I would say perhaps above all, which families often don't like to do this, but documentation. I think that governance family charter can be a truly important and seminal document. I think it helps people think through what it is as individuals and then as a group. What is the vision? What is the purpose? How did we get here? Where do we want to go? And that calls for a certain amount of individual and group introspection and reflection that will feed into this document, that will then be the basis of whatever strategy, whatever priorities as a family that you might want this business to head toward. And therefore, that gives you as the advisor a much better place from which to begin to advise, to shape solutions that actually work for this particular setup. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, lots of interesting points you brought out there that I think we're going to have quite a rich discussion to explore. But before we get there, I would like to invite Christian to let us have his remarks, and then we'll have a little wider discussion.
Hi, good afternoon. And first, just to thank Kamla for the confidence in inviting me to speak. It's the first time, having just completed the CCGI introductory course to governance, which was quite informative. The introduction as well, I appreciate that. And the introduction was sort of meant to frame where I'm going to go this afternoon in terms, getting the topic immediately. I was sort of struck by the limit of 8 minutes, and how do you delve into this and even do justice to any element of emotional intelligence from a practical perspective, or even more so not having any formal competence, right, in EI. So, I mean, we're all speaking here from an experiential position, and I think we understand that. So, like some of the presenters before me, I mean, when emotional intelligence is brought forward, the natural focus was to tend towards that topics such as succession planning. I mean, that's the golden one when it comes to family business, and the third generation pitfall and conflict negation and all of these things that sort of come to mind. But I did a bit of reflection to say, let's take a bit more of a positive spin on it. because there are positive elements to EI that could be gained rather than just an aversion of risk for the most part, or averting risk. You know, a lot of those things have with them formal frameworks and strategies, and for the most part, they tend to ignore the roles of the individual within the family and the family business. So for this discussion, just to frame a bit, when it comes to EI and family business, it's going to center around a proactive approach to EI and the development of successes, right? And that's going to extend to both successes from within the family and externally, and how that flows. So as we talk, I'm going to keep distinguishing between the family and the family business, right? And certain perspectives could be taken there. From my perspective and my experience, it has always been that these two organizations move in parallel. The success of one feeds the other, likewise, vice versa. Weight could be given to the success of one organization, the family versus over the family business. It depends on the particular dynamic and, of course, the eventual outcomes. So if I do keep referring to both entities as separate and apart, then that's quite deliberate, right? I'll share a model that I follow quickly in the chat. I just thought it was useful in hanging thoughts on, and that's Goldman's intelligence model, right? Emotional intelligence model. Just give me 1 second as I log that on. Right, and for reference now or later, it doesn't matter, but for the purpose of this discussion, and as we go, I chose to focus on the elements of self. And I think that's come up with both the speakers before, and that ultimately is within your control, and you have most control over elements of self, and those being self-awareness and self-management, right? Ultimately, the two key EI attributes was deemed in exploration as not only important in averting or avoiding the negative pitfalls, but also in harnessing those benefits of family business that are quite known, right? So apart from third generation succession, the higher levels of performance typically associated or inherent in family business, right? That they perform better in the hard times when things are difficult, right? They're content with consistent performance in the good ones, but ultimately outperform in the long run. The extended long-term view, whether that is reflected in attitudes to CapEx or in its embrace of ESG and those principles, the ability to be surprisingly diverse. Family businesses tend, through that self-awareness, to be very confident in their skill set and their ability to achieve and their motivation. And from our own business, from that perspective, has grown in my time here through industry and now into different segments as well. And ultimately, that self-awareness to leverage that skill set is important in that respect. Especially in economies such as ours that are quite small, it's necessary in many instances to continue growing as a business, obviously, but you become limited by sector, right? So this ability to be diverse becomes more and more important. Better than average talent retention. So we talk about someone that has the capacity, that is self-aware, can manage relationships, and by extent that has that empathy, has buy-in from employees and otherwise. So all these things flow, in my experience, from developing in the family and the family business participants a strong competence in self-awareness and self-management. Key elements of interpersonal skills or self-awareness, right? And just for those that may not be privy, I mean, I just give a quick overrun of what I'm referring to. You know, that existing or occurring within the self of one's mind, that self-confidence, that confidence in your inner person, the high interpersonal skills, that we are aware of your strengths, your weaknesses, your emotional triggers, your unique methods of self-regulation. For me personally, that's one that I've spent a lot of time developing in the last 10 years, you know. I have a pet peeve, I must say, with the word stress, right? And I mean, it's relative and it's flexible in definition, stress, but ultimately, when people refer to stress, they tend to encompass all that causes stress, not realizing that there is an intrapersonal element that we have control of, right? We can't control the external factors, but we have the ability to focus our attention to other activities, other pursuits. We heard earlier from an accomplished chef or cook. I mean, for me, that's one of my distractions. It allows me to go wholeheartedly into something else. A lot of people talk about sleep. Coincidentally, one of my notes says that I mean, this is what I tend to call the good night sleep skill, right? I remember being in secondary school when I learned that. I had a very influential teacher, and it was the day before an exam and had to study more, going home to do X, Y, and Z, and was told to behave myself, believe in myself, and go to bed, right? And ultimately, that would serve my skill set the most the following morning. And it's something I've always practiced ever since. It could be the most tumultuous of times. I'm going to get a good night's sleep. Right? It doesn't bother me. Heads down, asleep, and the next day we face it head on with confidence in oneself, right? So interpersonal skills. The reference to self-management. We talk about self-control, keeping destructive emotions in check, the adaptability, the flexibility. Those very useful in managing those family dynamics, those other potential conflicts that lead to upset, and obviously the negative pitfalls. Very important from a positive perspective in managing competitive dynamics, right? In the business place. A lot of times, as a family business, when it comes to self-management, we have restraint is an important competitive factor. In all of our analysis of our competitors' strengths and weaknesses, ultimately, when we're doing that for a non-family entity, we understand that their horizon or outlook is shorter than ours. And for that, self-restraint, self-management, we ride the situation and know that our day will come, right? The achievement drive, the initiative, very important. Something that really starts earlier, is developed through childhood, but ultimately manifests itself in specific competencies as we get older. You know? So touching on the two elements of self, it brings me back to where, and my own experience, this is a relatively new topic. So this is not something in my formal education in the late 90s that would have been offered. It wouldn't have been discussed. This is something that circulated in the mid-90s for the most part. Again, I mean, Goldman's Emotional Intelligence is a good read. But not something that in my formal education we would have had exposure to. We wouldn't have had any formal recognition of the ability or the need for strong EI in leveraging one's own skill set, let alone in a family environment. I recall in 2004 doing my MBA and registered for a negotiation course, and it was being taught by a psychologist. And for me, that was the most bizarre thing. I couldn't make the connection at the time until having actually gone through that experience and recognizing, again, how these attributes play into all these, what we would consider typically business functions. So without that formal recognition of it in our development as professionals, etc., I think our business is led by myself and one other second-generation family member, and we were fortunate in that we sort of came to that education on our own. Specific family circumstances assisted in that. Being cognizant of the numerous bad examples that are prevalent is very important, and we'll be able to develop that element of emotional intelligence. quite fortunately on our own. And I can look back at our careers and see how our interactions have changed, how our leadership styles have developed. Our approach in general has very much matured through the development of that emotional intelligence. And for the both of us, we now embrace that as a key skill that we need to impart through the family business, and through non-family executives. So I guess in keeping the spirit of these forums, I would assume is for experience sharing, right? So from that perspective, I figure the best thing for me to close with would be 3 real life elements that we as a family business have implemented, and how that feeds into the development of EI, not only for ourselves, not only for non-executive members, but throughout the entire family. So there's a recognition that responsible owners in a family business begin that journey at birth. And that sounds odd, right? But a new parent, myself, 2 lovely daughters of 5 and 2, and you quickly realize that there was no parenting class in secondary school, right? Perhaps one of the most important roles we'll ever face, and there's no formal education. And that is only magnified as we come into the element of a family business, where the desire is not a necessity, but the desire is to have continuity from the family as a first option. This is always or typically the best, provided the fit is there. So the importance of embracing parenting assistance or tools, whether it be Erickson stages of development theory and how that impacts the development of a child, the development of their self-esteem at an early age. We tend to think that these things happen as adults or teenagers or mid-teens, but the reality is simple things like the structure we provide a child at birth gives that child the ability to understand or be a disciplined approach to life, or have that sense of security that affords self-esteem. So it really does beginning molding the individual and that emotional intelligence from a young age, right? And of course, I mean, parenting has changed. We talked about generations yesterday in a bit more depth. Parenting and the approach to parenting has changed as the generations have as well, and this is part of that. The family life and the family member development, right? As well as the family business, all as one. That recognition that it starts with the individual and the family. If you ever want a successful family business participant, you need to recognize that at the element of the family. And just, I mean, drawing that a bit more, I mean, I look at an article, I mean, I call some ages here. I mean, so Family Business Org has an article on childhood education as it pertains to creating successful or equipped family business participants, and milestones for learning things, you know, just as a reference. Of course, you don't have time to go into all. So the actions, consequences link of age 3 to 5, right? Starting that conversation on a long-term perspective, understanding that your actions now have consequences, and how they relate to key attributes of family business. Age 4 to 12, you know, the importance of future and not instant gratification. We speak of the family business parallel of sitting out the good times, knowing that you're prepared for the bad ones and you're going to be more profitable than your non-family counterparts there, and ultimately outperform. I jump ahead, 6 to 10, money, 8 to 12, investing. I give a personal story here again. In 1990, at that point, Neil and Massey was divesting. Our family business was a part of the group, and it became a family business once again. And my drive to school, to secondary school, to Fatima, was with my father. And every day was a daily lessons in debt service, right? I mean, in those days, interest rates were a whopping 18%. Having taken on this responsibility was a huge one. And it was not too early, and it wasn't burdensome as he recalls now. It was part of that education, right? Part of that molding into being someone that can competently engage and participate in a family business. A second principle beyond that in the development, it's been a strong suggestion and not completely finalized yet because these things are still a bit taboo, but I'm a proponent for it, that all family members wanting to join the family business must engage in some formal structured exploration of themselves, right? Now we could call it therapy if you want, but that's the taboo label, right? That's the assessment of it. But the reality is some formal structured self-exploration, development of oneself, most important, right? To avoid the pitfalls of things like egos, to avoid the triggers and emotional triggers, to learn self-regulation tools. You know, conflict avoidance better than conflict management, or as always. So, you know, one of the key proponents that will ultimately form part of succession here is that formal assessment or formal structured exploration of oneself, development of those interpersonal skills and self-management. And the third that I would put out, I mean, we can't go too much in. So developing, again, going back to that idea of the family values and the family business values and the family business as one parallel or two parallel organizations, you know, and the development of an anecdotal handbook to gain family acceptance. I think Sanyu mentioned something similarly, right? And towards the end of her presentation. Getting buy-in to the principles of the family, the core values, the objectives, the purpose, as you talked about in the prior session. And then aligning that to the family business values, understanding that participation is not compulsory, that deciding upon which organization ultimately trumps the other. And more importantly, the need for myself and the other second generation leaders to employ emotional intelligence to communicate directly or correctly, I should say, depending on the audience, whether it's in the family setting or the family business, and how that develops legacy traits, you know, considered to be key to the success of both entities. And for us, that handbook is driven primarily by first generation anecdotes. And anecdotes because they're loose, they're flexible, it's storytelling, you can tailor it to an audience, whether it's family member, non-executive family, non-family executive. And they develop with the generation. So the anecdotes could then encompass the actions or stories of the third generation that have followed suit or have taken on the attributes of the first and second. You know, and we find that very important in our communication because ultimately it leads to more buying of the importance of emotional intelligence. If you're vested in the story and you're vested in the journey, then you understand your role in the journey, not just in yourself, and then you have a good understanding of yourself, then you realize that it's all interlinked, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Vishnu, are you coming to the end of your point there?
That was pretty much the end, to be fair.
Yes.
A good time.
Well, I have to congratulate Kamala on bringing the three of you together because I think we got such a rich overview. We started off with Vishnu setting the framework and the definition of emotional intelligence. We got the perspective from Sanyu as the advisor to families and family businesses. And then we got your very interesting roadmap almost about applying emotional intelligence within the context of the family business. So I thank you all that. I think that gave us a very fulsome backdrop against which to continue this discussion. So before we go to the floor, we like to have a little exchange among our panelists. If any of you would like to comment on some of what you've heard from your other panelists, we could kick things off with that.
Maybe if I can share, you know, building on what Christian would have just mentioned, you know, I'm if I can trace back even in my own family, you know, I'm a fourth generation business owner, but it has felt even in my own family as a reset every single time because every single generation has someone who, you know, founded a business or multiple people in that generation who founded the business in many cases because they wanted to control, and that happens a lot in family businesses. The founder wants to control the direction, and when their second generation comes along, they want to push them in that direction of the business. I've seen even in our history where every generation it resets and somebody gets good in a different area that they want to now develop into a business. And, you know, after having gone through quite a bit of learning as well in how to deal with this, I think maybe what has really helped is even with my own daughter, you know, as soon as she started to talk about careers, anything she spoke about, I would have looked for a way to give her an experience of that. So when she wanted to become a doctor, like most of our kids are most, you know, they want to become, I called a few of my friends who are at the Skeldon Hospital, which is on the border with Suriname. Say, hey, you know, my daughter wants to be a doctor. Can you guys just give her a sense of what it is like day to day? And, you know, we cleared the day. I dropped her there at 9 in the morning. I think by 11:30 I got a call, can you please pick me up? This is nothing that I thought doctors do. You know, it's, you know, they deal with sick people all the day. And, you know, it sounds really good when you hear being a doctor, but doctors have a really tough role to play. And she very quickly came to the conclusion that she actually doesn't like to see blood. And, you know, it would be sad that, you know, many kids grow up with this intent of, I don't like what my parents are doing. I don't like the family business because, first of all, they don't pay me for the time that I'm there. They expect me to be there early. They expect me to be there late. They expect me to work on weekends. This is the furthest that I want from actually being, you know, if this is what family business looks like, this is what I do not want. And fortunately or unfortunately, they could have grown up in the household of a founder who loved it, absolutely loved putting every hour of their time into the business. But that may not necessarily be their kids and what their kids want. So, you know, when she wanted to become a lawyer, I called one of my friends who's a lawyer here in Georgetown. Same thing, I dropped her off. I was still in the building when suddenly she appeared next to me saying, you know, everybody who comes in this office looks kind of sketchy. So I think, you know, who do you think needs a lawyer? You know, it's usually people who generally, especially if it's criminal law, have some negative interaction with the law. Right? And even if it's, you know, for a civil purpose, it's usually people are a bit confused about the civil process that need to go to the lawyer. So that also made her experience. So bit after bit, you know, by the time she got to 14, 15, 16, she actually came to the conclusion, hey, you know what you guys do? I really enjoy that. You know, I remember the first time she went to school and she had to explain what her parents do, I think 6 or 7. She told the class that her mother is a cashier and her father doesn't really work because she saw her mom handling the finances, and she saw me having meetings and you know, talking to people. I love business development, so that's my field. But to her, that wasn't work. So for her to over time realize, hey, the family business is like this, we deliver value, we invoice in this way, we take care of our clients in this way. It allowed her to build that that love for the business. And you know, when she did join us in 2019, yesterday was actually her 5th anniversary with the company. She's now 22 years old. She's going to be 23 soon. But she loves it. I mean, and she's been able to move one of our smaller businesses into, you know, over 5 years into the largest business. It's bigger than our main business now. So I think that is one way in which, from an emotional intelligence perspective, where I also have to be aware, you know, if I do the same thing that my father and my uncle and my grandfather did to me, I will also want to escape this business. But if I understand how she is thinking and what she sees as interesting and not interesting, I can also give her those experiences, because all of us will be in a state of ignorance about the things we do not know. And I appreciate that she does not know what she does not know. And if she keeps making decisions based on what she does know, she can end up making a lot of mistakes that I have made, that generations before me have made. So creating the opportunity for her to have experiential learning, for her to make different decisions, I think is a lesson that I would encourage all of us who are seeking to prepare the next generations for better decision making to really undertake. And I think that's why I like, you know, the path that Christian took with us, because again, we are talking about in this particular panel family businesses, we are talking about the importance of emotional intelligence. And I believe that we do need to learn from the mistakes and the missteps and the lessons of the past if we are going to develop stronger Caribbean businesses.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that I found very interesting, Christian, your description of almost deliberately nurturing those elements of emotional intelligence, starting with the know yourself and understand yourself. I mean, if that's therapy, I think we could all do with a dose of it. It's really important. Sanyu, would you like to comment on some of this?
I really enjoyed both Christian and Vishnu's descriptions and discussions about the actual lived experience of family businesses into second and third generations, fourth, I think, in the case of Vishnu. And how it is that emotional intelligence has played into it. Actually, when Christian was, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. When Christian was speaking, one of the things that occurred to me that in reading around the subject as well in preparing for this, I saw that statistically, the sort of default setting is that on a test, something like, say, 80% of women will do really well on an emotional intelligence quotient as compared to a much lower percentage of men, which suggests that, might be some sort of natural inclination, maybe nurturing more than anything in terms of women's tendency to be grown up to be a lot more naturally tending towards emotional intelligence or displaying it than men will. So men will have to work harder at it. And it's great to see that, both Vishnu and Christian are making strides here. So well done. I think that the one comment I think I'd add at this point is that in terms of, again, I go back to both Christian and Vishnu have been, really helpful in looking at the most influential emotional intelligence model or description that came from the Goldman book, and I go back to that model that includes the awareness of self and of others, and the empathy, and so on, and in terms of self-knowledge, I think one of the things that's self-awareness. One of the things that's important is for me, coming to it as an advisor is being sufficiently self-aware, but also aware of the fact that of what might be motivating the client in a way that I might find disappointing and might respond negatively to if I were less self-aware as well. So being aware that I can give good advice, objectively good advice from my perspective, but that is not necessarily the advice that the client wants at that point, because their decision is not necessarily totally driven by what I, as a lawyer, would see as, well, these are the considerations, of course, these are the things you need to look at, why are we going into things that aren't really that shouldn't be as relevant, or that shouldn't score as high on which way this decision goes as you're doing. And I'll give a quick example. And this is something I worked on with a colleague who's the core professional advisor. I was advising from the point of view of the fact that the client's holding structure included several BVI companies that we had helped to not so much set up as to advise from time to time. And then there was this sudden urgency on the part of the professional colleagues saying, well, we very quickly need to do some restructuring here. And we had congratulated ourselves not too long before about, what a good structure. This is for a family that is Middle East based, second generational. They own very substantial assets, and they've sort of organized everything in a way that worked really well. We've got some trust vehicles, we've got some companies, we've got different jurisdictions and so on, and it worked very well. And then one of the family members moves to
went to work in the States for some experience, and while he and his wife were there, it turns out they're having a baby, and everybody says, well, you must come home to have this baby. And he says, well, I can't, she can come, but I can't come. And we want to be together when the baby is born. This is our first child. And they say to her, well, the primary advisors say to her, well, you can't have a US citizen baby. That will mess up our whole holding structure. There's all kinds of complications that come into this once you've got this potential beneficiary who is. And it makes a lot of sense. It makes practical, good legal, regulatory sense to say, come home and have the baby. He can come, he could fly in for a few days. I said, no, we don't want that. We want to spend our pre-birth and post-birth together as a little family. We don't want to be separate. So he refused, basically. So they had the US baby. Now, my colleague had seen this coming, and she said, well, from what she'd seen of the family dynamic, he wasn't going to cave. He had reasons to make concessions in the past, and this was one where he was going to stand his ground and he wasn't going to move. So very quietly, she began to go about thinking about, well, okay, well, we're going to have to restructure. So she reaches out and says, look, what would we need to do this and this with it? What would the BVI companies need? So I'm saying, well, what's going on? So this is where I get the story. And clearly we see that she obviously applied her good knowledge, intimate knowledge of of how the family worked, to determine that there was no point in wasting time waiting for him to change his mind, no matter how upset the rest of the family were, because it wasn't legally at all the most logical decision to make, but there it was, and change happened. Citizenships were transferred to, yes, there was a lot of rearranging. But it happened, but I took off when I said kudos to my colleague, because she clearly understood who she was working with, and in the end, what the motivators were. And by jumping in very quickly with a plausible and a good solution for them in the end, it actually eased family tensions. So the angst against the dissenting brother was minimized by the fact that she was able to step in the way she did with a solution, even before they sort of said, well, what are we going to do now? She said, well, we could try this if that happens.
Yes, a very hard-headed business. It really makes the true emotional part of it. Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. Yes, I think one of the things that I found interesting too in hearing the discussion is that as an advisor, it's also very important for you to understand your own biases, and so that you can better help other people and be free of those and be truly an impartial advisor when you're advising in those kinds of situations. So it's really very helpful. Are we right? I think we are now into our last half hour, and I'm being advised that we can invite our participants to join the conversation. Not only questions, but comments, experiences are also welcome. But Christian, I find it very interesting, how did you describe it? The family notebook, handbook of anecdotes.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's recommended as a formal document, so to speak. But for us, we treat it more as a bit of storytelling.
Right.
Things that just really enforce values, core values from the first generation. And by keeping it informal, it provides the opportunity, we find, to adapt to the audience, whether it's second generation or third or non-family executive. It's not set in stone, and it changes with the organization as well, but you find a way to intertwine the lessons, that keep the buy-in for the most part. So really an anecdotal handbook, if so to speak.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. I think today we're faced with so much documentation and the need for documentation, and very often family businesses are very entrepreneurial, and all this documentation kind of ties them down, and we don't have time for it. But when you convert it into storytelling, it's quite an interesting way of passing on the traditions and the values and what you stand for.
And then it transcends between the family and as an organization and the family business as well, right? Without putting off the family member who may not be that open to a formal document, etc. They have the family because they could see through their relationships how these stories apply both from a professional and a family perspective. Yes, we figure that keeping it informal is best.
Yes, I see both Kamala and Sanyu have their hands up. I don't know who had precedence.
But normally I'll give in to the panelists. But if it's okay, Sanyu, I just wanted to ask this question of Vishnu in particular, because I really love all that Christian outlined in terms of how you deal with the dynamics of the family, across different generations. But Vishnu is in Guyana, and Guyana is a country that is now finding a lot of persons coming into the country and wanting to start businesses as well. So Vishnu, I wanted to ask your thoughts in the fact that you actually also serve as a coach for businesses across the Caribbean region. Are you finding that there are different kinds of pockets of culture in the different countries? So, I find Guyana has its own unique kind of way in which you connect and do business. And so when it comes to that emotional intelligence that we are requiring of persons, is there some sort of difference that persons need to have if you're going to now try and do it across the region? It's similar to what Sanyu explained earlier with her experience that her colleague shared with her.
Yeah, we are noticing now a shift in Guyana. I would say pre-2017, pre-2019. The market was fairly much set. Companies had their own share of the market. They defended it really strongly, and there was no significant demand prior to 2015, 2017. The market was pretty set. After 2019, the demand side has grown significantly, driven mainly by our expanding energy sector, but also the spending that our government is doing. Now the budget has doubled, and it's likely to keep growing double digit, if not triple digits, in the coming years, and that pushes a lot of money into the economy that companies can then benefit from by aligning themselves properly. I think we have offices in Suriname as well, and although Suriname has been in onshore energy for nearly 50 years, they're now venturing into offshore. However, I've also noticed there that the similar thing that happened in Guyana 2015 and prior, there are also significant family-owned businesses and conglomerates that have their areas carved out. And the message we're sending there is the companies that are looking in are mainly looking in initially from the Caribbean because they know the culture, they have experience with Guyana. And these are not the companies that are the weak companies in their markets. These are the companies in Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, the BVI, the Bahamas, and even the Dutch Caribbean, Curacao, that are looking into Guyana, looking into Suriname, that already have capacity in their own home markets and are coming in with a plan, with the budget, with the skills, with the emotional intelligence in many cases, because they have had to practice it for a very long time in order to get to the top of their market. Those are the companies we're competing with, and that's leaving out the US, Canadian, British, other European companies that are coming in. So in Guyana, it has been an awakening. We can now actually see the shift in the market, both from the larger companies coming in, but also the new entrants in the market, the new Guyanese companies that are rapidly growing. And it's changing the dynamics. I think it's for the good, because the more economic activity we have, the more jobs we create, the more well-paying jobs we create, the more our citizens benefit. When our citizens are able to earn decent salaries, the taxation to a country also goes up, and then that feeds the cycle. The government is then able to do more. But before that, and even up to now, what is unfortunate in these markets is that the owners or the senior executives of these companies, they come to us, and I've been in coaching, this is my 10th year now. They come to us when it's a point of crisis. Their wife died, the husband died, the mortgage is overdue, the kids have all migrated and will not come back to this country. Somebody died, they had one child, the child died. It's always, I would say always is a bit, maybe 80 and 90% of the time, when they do end up at my doorstep or when they do end up for support, it's in the middle of a crisis. And I always tell them that, had you come 5-10 years earlier, your company would have been 10 times as large. We can do this. So the first year or two of working with these companies, it's a lot of crisis control, restructuring. First of all, deciding what do you actually want. In many cases, there was no vision. There was not even a storybook. There was not even a destination to say, hey, I started this company to achieve this or to serve this market or to build this solution. So we start here, and then we start building the structure around it. We start building succession around it. But that's unfortunate because today, and if I share my screen right now with you, we have 4 inquiries, one from Jamaica, one from Trinidad, 2 from Trinidad, 2 from Trinidad, 1 from Jamaica, 1 from Barbados, just today alone, asking for some have set up, some are about to set up, and they come to us, they come to a company like ours before they've even spent any money into this market, and then we will be in a situation where our own local companies in every country will say, well, the foreigners are coming or other people are coming, but they're coming with a plan of how to execute. And again, if I take my company as an example, more than 50% of our revenue is outside of Guyana, with companies that are coming in here wanting to get the support. Whereas the support is here, it's homegrown, it's available to all our locals, but they're waiting for a crisis to wake them up to get there. So I think the real challenge, and maybe my fellow panelists have some solutions for this. I don't like sounding alarmist. I think every time, Kamla, when you talk about the crisis, the poly crisis that we're in, I'm thinking, hey, Kamla is really making me get riled up here. This poly crisis keeps bothering me. I don't like being in a poly crisis state. Nobody likes living in a crisis state. However, how do we wake people up? How do we make sure that they make use of the resources that are available to them so that generations, even their own family generations, but generations to come in the country, can benefit from the fantastic goods and services that they bring to the market? So a long answer. However, it is something that is really, because of the pace of the growth of Guyana's economy now, double digits for the last 3 years, and we're going to do double digits in the next, in the foreseeable future. It is shifting so fast that if we don't wake up, and this is happening, we see people actually leaving entrepreneurship, leaving the public sector, and just becoming employees in the oil and gas sector or the indirect oil and gas sector, which is also decent because I think for a very long time, Caribbean governments, Caribbean BSOs have placed entrepreneurship as this solution to everything. Well, yeah, go start your own business. And I think that is very dangerous because there are many people who should not be in business. If you don't actually have a superior good or service, you could actually do yourself more harm. And there are many entrepreneurs who earn less at the end of the month than someone who's just earning a salary, right? So Guyana is becoming that market where we actually do need productive, high-performing employees to drive these companies forward. So I think, we've seen tourism in some cases in our country. We've seen entrepreneurship as, well, if you can't make it in employment, you can't make it go do entrepreneurship. I think we need to get to a place where, let's find our place where we can deliver maximum value as a company or as an individual, so that we really benefit from it. But again, I would love to hear, how do we wake our Caribbean entrepreneurs up to get the support when it is the actual time to get that support, not when it's too late.
Thanks, Vishnu.
Sanyu, you wanted to make a contribution? I see your hand is up.
Yes, that was really interesting, Vishnu. And do you have an answer to the question you asked? You know, why don't people come? Why do people not consult, take professional, take outside advice when it's available and being availed of or made service of by outsiders? I don't have an answer, but I think it's probably the same here.
Yeah, it's a bit of superheroitis. You know, the founders of these companies have been able to solve a lot of problems on their own. And they get stuck in that mode as well of, yeah, I'll solve it, I'll do it, I'll solve it. And in some cases, they move their family members to the side. You can't do it, I'll do it. Instead of building capacity or bringing in external capacity, I'll solve it. And they end up burning themselves out. You know, we also have another syndrome in our country where people have worked from 4 a.m. in the morning till midnight for decades, not having enough time to invest with their own families. And then after a while, because of that disconnect, you actually have family members waiting for them to exit this world so that they can get their hands on the wealth that was developed over many decades, only to have that blown out in a year or 2 years. All the wealth is gone and the company is forgotten. So I think it's a little bit of initially what kicks off a business. Yes, I can do it. Yes, I can solve a problem. But getting stuck in that mode and not realizing that, oh, wait, it has gone beyond me. I now need to develop and reach out and make sure that the second generation, if they intend to join the business, gets prepared as well. And even makes a choice. Do they want to be in the business? Because we also have a tendency in Guyana, for example, if you're not going to be in the business, you don't get shares in the business, which I think is very dangerous because, you know, I think very early on, if we did have a family playbook or a family business handbook, it would say, well, the second generation, this is how it's treated. The third generation, the second generation has to decide, but there's a predictability to it. If not, we really just reward the people who can claim that they'll do something with the business. Shares get pushed there, families get split apart. You know, it's one of the big issues as well in most of the Caribbean. You know, we're expanding in Suriname, and it's surprising to see how many family disputed businesses there are where they can't sell properties, they can't sell this because they have each other in court, just because of a lack of clarity and structure in the beginning.
Yeah, takes a lot of sort of internal foresight and vision and recognition of self and that sort of natural emotional intelligence in terms of understanding yourself and wanting to get more out of the family and other people as opposed to just driving on your own agenda, I suppose.
Maturity as well, emotional.
Yeah, that. I see there is a comment in the chat from, is it Misha? And I wonder if Misha would like to unmute and make the contribution herself. Is that possible?
Thank you,
Great.
This has really been an interesting discussion, but I think I'm including more on the points that Vishnu has been making. I think he's been hitting some solid points. I just wanted to make a comment that, you know, when we think about how we're preparing the next generation and even the question he posed about entrepreneurship, I will say for my thought on that very question is we have to also have an enabling environment that fosters, and I don't think across the Caribbean we have that culture that nurtures and fosters and encourage entrepreneurship in terms of building capacity and even helping to pass on the knowledge, whether it's governance or how businesses are managed, so that those who are successful businesses become mentors or nurturers for entrepreneurs. That's one point. But the second point I wanted to speak to is this has been such an interesting governance week in terms of contending viewpoints. But one of the things that I think we must take away is how do we bridge the generational gap? We have to do exactly what Vishnu did. He listened to what his daughter had to say, her viewpoints. And I'm thinking that we have to give space to allowing the younger generation to hear them, and to give them that safe space to be able to make contribution based on their experience. Remember, Faye, they're the ones driving AI. They're the ones driving this digital age. They're the ones driving the social revolution, or this, what we call the social impact revolution, and challenging the status quo. So if we want to prepare for what we call future governance, I think we also have to be hearing what they have to say. That's just the comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I just wanted to also mention, the way this came about is that, I didn't actually grow up with my parents. I grew up with aunts and uncles and grandmoms. And what always struck me, especially with my grandparents, is they spoke to me as if I was an adult, even when I was, early teens. And they had discussions with me like I was an adult. And it made, my thinking mature a lot faster. I got my first coach when I was 19. And it has just helped me grow really fast. And as my daughter was getting older, my coach also taught me the concept, the parent-child concept. And versus an adult-adult concept. And the parent-child concept is, if I continue being the parent, if I keep talking to you as if I'm the parent, you have no choice but to respond to me as a child. Or if I behave as a child, if she behaves like a child, I have no choice but to keep responding to her as the parent. And it took a few sessions for that to sink in, to say, okay, good. As an adult, if you want someone to respond to you like an adult, you actually have to treat them like an adult. You have to communicate with them like an adult. And that really helped. And at a very young age, I also had her have her own coaches, her own mentors. And luckily enough, she pays for those by herself now. So that's fantastic. And they have helped her as well learn how to express herself, because that's one of the things that sometimes makes us continue treating kids like kids, because they have not learned to articulate their thoughts as yet. So her having that separate support, not with me, because with me, I'm the parent, I might want to push her a bit faster, but having that support that has the patience and the time to help her articulate her own thoughts has really helped us to improve our relationship, improve our communication. It's so much easier, I think at the age of 19, 20, spoke to her as an adult, she responds as an adult, and the decision making is so much more productive between us. So I just wanted to, for anyone who this might be useful for, if the easiest thing to think about it, her friend in school joined like the month after she joined us. I've known her, I've picked them up, I've dropped, but I treated her like an adult from day one. Right, her friend. I treated her friend like an adult from day one, and I was still treating my daughter as my child, although she was working for me. So sometimes it's good to think about, what if my child was just another blank adult that I knew nothing about, showing up here with value? And that mindset switch really helps a lot.
Having to take off the parent hat. Yeah. Christian, what's your experience with those intergenerational? And I think we have about 5 minutes, and then we start doing concluding remarks. But
so I mean, we have a bit of a peculiar setup in that my eldest daughter is 5 years old, and my eldest nieces are 25, right? So we almost have a third and fourth generation in our generation. So yeah, it's been interesting from that perspective. I'm still learning, like we all will. So for me, as you mentioned, the parent cap, and I mean, it's a great takeaway in terms of treating someone like an adult, right? Because I do have that uncle cap on sometimes when I'm trying to speak, and that's a takeaway for me in how you approach, and you do find more success in that approach, treating someone like an adult, giving them the autonomy to think and make mistakes and learn these from their own perspective. Constant learning in that communication. I mean, again, all individuals. And for me, the biggest challenge is making sure that I've found is finding the so what we have one of the second, third generation working at this time, but those that don't, in having them have a similar perspective of both organizations. Sometimes they don't make the leap from the family to the family business. And that seems the challenge that I think most work needs to be put into, because ultimately both parties have influence on each other, and there are a lot of negatives that could come from an uninformed family to a family business. Definitely that whole idea of taking the parent or uncle cap off is a takeaway that I'll take, Vishnu. I mean, that's really informative from your own experience. And the fact that you could parallel it to your daughter and your daughter's child in that same respect.
Yes, that is interesting.
It is. It hits home for the most part.
Yes, that you treat the stranger in a way that's more nurturing and allowing that person to mature more effectively than your own child, because you're still in that parent mood. Yes, very interesting.
Then again, I mean, doing that, it's ongoing. So I have 5 nieces and 1 nephew. I have my 2 children, and there's 7 individuals. Right?
Yes.
So ultimately, the whole discussion on EI is being able to understand or have the empathy to understand the individual and their perspective as well. And definitely helps when you take that parent or uncle cap off. Just as Sanyu was done with her clients, right? And taking a step back and understanding when her own prejudices or prior opinions may affect her judgment. Very similar.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you get in a situation where you just do not understand the position the other person is taking, that is a real opportunity to step back and really try and understand where it is they're coming from and what are the underlying issues that would make them take that kind of position that seems so opposed to moving forward. So I think we have just about 6 minutes. Kamla, good time to wrap up. I don't think we have any more comments or questions.
No, so you can ask the panelists to give their closing thoughts.
Just to give your closing thoughts, and we'll just go in reverse order. It seems very popular. So Christian, I'll ask you to give your 2-minute wrap up.
It begins with the self, right? Knowing oneself, constant improvement, constant work, reflection, constant regulation, so that we get the best of ourselves. I mean, in simple terms, getting a good night's sleep, but of course, keeping our emotions in check so that we could leverage our skill set. No right approach, no 100% grades. We're talking about a soft skill, so ultimately, you're always going to fall somewhere on the spectrum where improvement is possible. A lifelong pursuit of an unattainable excellence, I guess, as it really does deal with individuals.
Absolutely. Great. Sanyu?
Yes, a lifelong pursuit indeed, but I think one that's really rewarding in the end, in the quality of relationships that develop, not just professionally, but I think within our own families. And actually, what I had my hand up now that I remembered, but sort of got distracted by I think it was Vishnu's comments, so I responded to that instead, was I wanted to say to both, or to ask both Christian and Vishnu, and I do this by way of closing comment now. We spoke a lot and have spoken a lot in the course of the week about but particularly today about value systems and how those are communicated in a non-family environment, for example, how you choose board members, how you onboard them, what that process looks like, and how it's done in a way that the values and the purposes and the pursuits of the particular enterprise that they're joining are actually made clear to them, inculcated if they haven't brought them with them. What happens with families, I think, but this is sort of, and this is from my observations, is that with the first generation families, perhaps, and I'm thinking in circumstances where I think maybe families just lived a lot closer together. Vishnu was speaking about growing up with grandparents. So I'm kind of seeing where extended families tended to sort of organically just spend a lot more time together, and therefore the passing on of a shared worldview, if you like, shared ideas, shared principles, shared values, which then fed into which you brought with you into the business. That those were sort of organically transmitted between generations. And then we've got to the generation, I guess, that became ours, where you didn't spend that much time anymore with you didn't spend that much time anymore in that extended family milieu. Yes, you might know them, but you didn't really. For example, I know that I know my cousins, my first cousins, even some second ones, a lot better than my children know their cousins. There just hasn't been that much. So if you put us in a business, in terms of at least having a shared history, that book of family anecdotes and so on, Christine, I think we'd be able to, my cousins and I would be able to find a lot more that were shared memories that moved into shared values, one hopes. How do you, I suppose in a time of less contact, and I mean the kids might maybe spend a lot more time digitally, talking to each other and so on, and maybe that cultivates the relationships, I'm not sure. How do you try to make sure that the values that channel up to generations are sufficiently shared that when you want to be able to preserve within the business a core of people who are family members, because I assume that of course it will be a good thing to attract some outside people to the business, but you want a core that keeps it a family business. So how do you do that with the changing social fabric environment that we find ourselves in? So that
I think, Faye, maybe we need another 90 minutes,
Yes.
but I'll do my best to I'll do my best to just include it in my wrapping up remarks as well. I think kids are really connected a lot more digitally now, more than we were back then. I think families are getting more and more dispersed than they were 20 to 40 years ago. So I have seen even in my own family how well the cousins are connected digitally, WhatsApp groups and everything else that they have. What I think is really missing is like when you talk about values, right? Like the value of care. We like to translate it from an abstract value to an actual behavior. So if we say the value of care, maybe it is be caring to your elders. And I think that is one thing that if we as adults don't create the opportunity for our next generation to see us caring for the previous generation, who's going to care for us, right? And so in our own family, I do my best. I'm on the planning committee for the family reunions on both sides of my family, just to make sure that at least once or every other year, we bring as many of them together and they see us doing things for the previous generation, and as much as we can, so they learn how to do that. Because I think that's one thing that's really dropping off, where kids are not seeing their parents doing anything for their grandparents, and guess what message we're sending to them? As soon as we are older and less useful, we might get parked somewhere and not really be able to contribute all this wisdom that we've generated over so many decades. So I think a practical way in which we can ensure that we have happier, more successful people, and I put happiness above success, because if you think about life, isn't that what we really want? And if we become more happy and successful by having the right behaviors, they need to help us everywhere, not just in the business, but in our personal lives as well. So one practice that I really encourage everyone to take on is think about the agreed behaviors in the family and the agreed behaviors in the business. And there should be a significant overlap. In our case, we have agreed behaviors such as be proactive, be innovative, be collaborative. And on a weekly basis, we actually look for examples of when that happened and when the opposite happened. And what did we do when we saw the opposite happening? And that turns this behavior over time into authentic behavior of the family or the family business, if that's the case. We even do this in non-family businesses as well. What do we as a team agree that the behaviors need to be for collective success? So with that said, I know it's something that we do need to instill in the next generation, make sure that they do it better than we did. But we also have a responsibility in the present. Life is both long and short, so we have a lot of work to do.